we're going to make the dog sweater, a small dog sweater, like you saw in the picture before this. And we're going to use the blue small Nifty Knitter loom with 24 pegs on it. I'm going to actually quickly do the E-Wrap cast on that you see me do in plenty of my videos. I was going to try doing a different cast on, but it was kind of fighting me a little bit with the camera angles and that. So I'm going to stick with the basics. If you know how to do the crochet cast on, you can go ahead and do that one as well, or any other cast on that you choose. So I'm going to quickly do the E-Wrap cast on, hiding my tails in as I go, which is what we usually try to do. The first part of the dog sweater is actually the neck that we're going to be working on. So go ahead and push your first row down so you have more room to work. And we're actually going to work the garter stitch over 8 rows for right now. I like the garter stitch because it doesn't roll as much. So I just wanted to kind of, I mean, you could also probably end up modifying this pattern any way that you see for maybe a stitch that you would prefer to use. Now with the garter stitch, I have my stitch marker here so that we can keep track, or excuse me, my row counter here, so we can keep track of the rows as we go. So for this section, we're just going to alternate knitting a row, then purling a row over the course of 8 rows. So the first one is going to be a knit, and now I usually prefer to do the E-Wrap method, where I would wrap it like this and knit over. But for this video, I'll do a little different, and I'll actually do a flat knit, which is just laying it in front of the yarn, or laying it in front of the peg and knitting over. So I'll do that instead this time around. This is more like a flat knit. And again, the angles you're going to be working at is going to be a lot different than mine, so you'll have a little easier time with it. And this just, I think, produces a little different look than the E-Wrap one. I think a little less flexibility, which would be good because it's going to be going around the dog's neck. Now it looks like I'm struggling more with it, but it's mainly just because of the angle I'm holding it at. Normally I would be sitting back, so I wouldn't be fighting with it as much. Oops. Boy, this does not want to cooperate. Here we go. Stuck that behind there. Get over there. Sometimes I think they just want to fight you. Again, because we're using 2 strands of the worsted weight yarn, we want to make sure we're getting both of them over. And I'm just using like a navy blue, and I don't even know what the other one was called. It was from a different, I don't have the label anymore, but it kind of goes between black and gray. So I thought it would look nice. Again, with the flat knit, we're just laying it in front. So continue doing this flat knit for the whole first row, and then come back for the next row. So I've finished that row, row 1, and I've already pushed my click marker down to show that I completed row 1. Now the row 2 is going to be the purl stitch. So I'm going to quickly show you that if you don't know what it is, and then you'll be able to finish it up yourself. So the purl stitch, again, is where you take your crochet, or your hook, sorry, and you go in the loops to grab your new yarn, turning it and bring it back up, making sure that both yarns are there. And then take it off the peg. Okay, why are you fighting me so much? Take it off the peg and put your new loop on the peg. So you go to the next one, go under, turning it to bring it back up, making sure both loops are there, and taking it off the peg. But you can use your tool if it's fighting you a little bit, and put the new loop on. So you go through, make your loop, and go ahead and continue. So go ahead, continue on this row doing your purl, using your row counter to mark off. Now again, work that back and forth until you end up hitting 8 rows on your row counter. Then that way we can come back here and we'll move on to the next step. So again, go finish, keep doing the garter stitch, which is knit a row, purl a row, until you hit row 8. We have done our 8 rows of the garter stitch, as you can see in here. This is going to be the neck of the dog sweater. What we're going to work on now is the spots for the legs to go in front. If you want to make the collar of this wider, go ahead and make a couple more rows of garter stitch before you turn on and do this next process. I kind of want the openings for the legs to be a little up higher on the dog, starting with, just because I figured that might allow for better movement. And what I did is I'm using stitch markers, and I'm keeping these 2 pegs. If you look at the center, if you've got the Nifty Knitter with this little knob here, you're going to keep these two alone, leave these 2 alone, but then you're going to place 4 stitch markers on each side of it. And we're going to be binding off those pegs to create our openings, pretty much like my buttonhole video, which I can put a link for. And we're going to bind off that to give us the space for where the legs are going to go. We're going to work our way around doing 1 row of knit, and when we get to our space markers, we're going to bind them off, and that's going to help create the opening. So all you have to do, and this time I'm going to do the E-wrap knit method, just because I think it's a little easier with this process. So I'm going to wrap that first peg, knit, I'm going to go over here, wrap this peg, and then we're going to move it over. Knit it over, and wrap it once, knit it over, or move it over, making sure to get both strands of the yarn when you move it over, and make sure both are on the new peg. And again, knit it over, wrap it one more time, move it over, knit it over, wrap it one more time, knit it over, move that over to this peg, looks like I'm missing a strand. There we go. Okay, now knit this over. Now go ahead and work your way all the way around, knitting over until we get to the other pegs that we want to bind off. Okay, we're getting close to the ones that we want to bind off over this way. So again, we're going to wrap this peg, knit it over, move it over, knit it over, wrap it one more time, knit it over, move it over, knit it over, wrap it one more time, knit over, move it over, knit over, wrap one more time, and move it over. Oops. I've got loop. Get back on there. Okay, and then knit this over. Remember, we're leaving these alone. So now we can just, I'm going to rewrap this one just because it's in the middle. I'm going to rewrap that, knit it over here and knit it. Now what that did is it bound off, if you look, the two sections that we want our legs to be able to go through. So now we can go ahead and we're going to close off these circles as we go around. And this is going to provide the spot for where the legs can go in. So you can go ahead and take off these stitch markers here, because you do not need them anymore. And that was the next section, was to bind that off, and now we're back to our starting point again. So we'll come back and we'll do another part in a little bit. Okay, scratch what we were going to do before. We're not going to actually close off these yet. We're actually going to work, I forgot the part where we have to work these two pegs for a little bit. And we should be on, we've already done row 9, which was when we went around binding off and knitting. Now we're just going to work these two pegs back and forth to kind of be the part in between where the legs are. So you're just going to work yourself back and forth. This counts as one row, so get your row counter and click that. When you come back that way, that counts as another row. Let's click that off. Another one. And the clicking you hear is me clicking that off. I wasn't sure how many I was going to do, so I'm just eyeballing it actually right now a little bit. So I'm using my row counter to get an idea of what row we're going to be on when we're all done. Okay. Because this will make sure that the openings are a little bigger for the feet to go in, just to give it a little more of an opening. If you look on this side, you can see what it's doing. So that's all we really have to do right there. That is enough, and I'm on row 15. And now what we can do is we can work, excuse me, because we're going this way now. We will now close off that row. But first, let's take a break. Just kidding. Be back in a second. Then we'll do the next part. The next part now is to go back through and wrap with what is empty and work our way around, just doing the simple knit. I didn't want to do a lot of different stitches throughout this. I wanted to keep this a very simple dog sweater, just to give you a basic idea how to do it, and then you could always tweak it yourself to different stitches. So again, this is going to be the front. This is the neck part, and this is where his two little leggies are going to go. So now we're going to work it around to bind it. I don't know why I just said leggies. Sorry. But now we're going to go ahead and we're going to wrap, working our way around. Excuse me. Let me just fix the camera. I'm a little too close here. Okay, that's better. Sorry about that. So now we're going to just wrap, and I'm going to do the E-wrap because it's a little faster for me. And again, you're just going to be wrapping the empty pegs as you're going around. But this is going to be considered a row, so keep that in mind. And what you can do is kind of knit your way around as you're going if you want. And we're going to try to do this for 10 rows. I'm kind of modifying the pattern as we go. And I will try in a couple days to have the written pattern available on my blog. So make sure you check that out if you're somebody that would like to see the written pattern. I'm making a bunch of notes right now of what I'm changing so that I can hopefully make the written pattern a little easier to understand. So again, we're just working away around, and we're just closing off those empty pegs so that the legs will be closed in. A lot of times I hold it like this when I'm E-wrapping because I can actually wrap faster when I'm holding it that way. Don't ever be afraid to hold a loom whichever way you need to get the job done, basically. Okay, we're coming around to our second group of empty pegs that all we have to do is wrap. And once you get back to here, what I would suggest is you can easily bind this or knit this over and go back and do your other ones real quick. See if there's any that you missed, which was this one. and click your little row counter. That was one more row complete. Now what I'm thinking is we're going to do 10 rows just like that, working our way around. And again, what that's going to do is close off our holes right there. And this is just going to be in between the dog's legs. So go ahead and keep just doing the basic E-wrap around for another 10 rows until you get to row 25. And then we'll meet back here. Okay guys, you should be on row 25 now if you have your row counter out. And again, take a look at what we have so far. So the idea is, the dog's head would go through here and his feet would go down here. So what we created right now was part of like the belly being covered. So what you need to decide, depending on the size of the dog you have, is do you need more rows to cover the belly, or can you now just work on what would be covering the back? I'm actually going to go on to the next step, which is covering the back, which means we have to bind off some stitches again. But again, depending on your dog, if you measure your dog's length to see if you need more, you can very easily add in more stitches. That's another reason I try to keep the knit for most of the project, to make it easier just to add stitches where you would like to if you need to adjust for your dog. So what we're going to do now is we need to bind off. Now keep in mind where we bound off before. This is the bottom. This is where we're going to bind off. So we're going to look at it and be like, well, how much do we want to bind off? How much do we want it to kind of go around the dog? So what I'm going is I'm going to look at my middle, which is again where I started, and we have these two pegs. We're going to need to bind these off now, and we're going to work our way out. So if you need to, you can grab some stitch markers. And what we're going to do is we're going to bind out pretty much probably 4 pegs on each side. I'm not actually going to use the stitch markers. I think we can handle it, but we're going to bind off. We're going to start right in the middle because we're getting ready to come around again. And we're going to bind off these 4 right here. And then when we get around to the other side, we'll bind off the last 4. And then we're just going to work as a flat panel. So step 1, let's go ahead and bind off these stitches. And this is going to count as another row of knit as you work around and binding off. So if you remember how we did it, we wrapped, knitted it over, moved it over. And again, make sure you're doing the side that has the holes for the arms because you want the bottom of this to be bound off. Knit over. You can wrap it again if you'd like. Knit over. Move it over. Keeping an eye on your strands, obviously. And count, we've got 2 bound off, so now we're working on our 3rd. Wrap it again. And again, you may find that you need more bound off. It's really going to depend on the dog. Different breeds of dog are shaped different. I don't actually know any other way to put it than that, so you may have to modify. I'm going to do one more wrap here. And then we're going to move it over. This is kind of like a crochet bind off because we're doing the extra wraps in between. I just feel like it gives it a nicer edge. So now, our last one here, if you look, oops, we have bound off 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can kind of look at it and say, well, is that going to be enough after we bind off 1, 2, 3, 4 here? It might let it actually be around the dog pretty well. So I'm going to keep the idea of 4 on each side being bound off and work my way around. But again, with your dog or whoever you're making it for, you may decide to do less binding off or more binding off on where you want the sweater to actually hit on the dog. So we're going to keep going like we were before. Now because I need to know where the last 4 is when I get to it, 1, 2, 3, 4. So what I'm going to do is, I know this is the one where I got to start binding off. I will get out a stitch marker because I won't be able to probably be aware of it. So I'm going to quickly put a stitch marker on here. And that's going to let me know as I'm going around when I hit this one is when I need to restart binding off. Get it on there. But actually, I just realized something. We need to bind off these 4. I should have worked my way this way, and I kind of did it wrong. But we have those binded off, and now what we need to do is we need to get these binded off. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to do a little different step. So what you're going to actually do is come over here and bind off these 4. Leave this alone over there, and just bind off these 4. We're not going to be able to put the rows in between, the things in between, but we can still bind them off. Because otherwise we would have ended in the wrong place. So just go ahead, and we're just doing a regular knit bind off on this side. I just did it the wrong way. What I should have did was went around until I got back here and started binding off when I went this way. So I kind of bound off the wrong way than I should have, but it shouldn't hurt the process too much. And again, I'll explain that one more time, what you can do. Okay, what I did, like I said, now we have all those bound off for our dog sweater. It does do a little different with not having the chains in between, but it shouldn't affect the look too much, because this is just to bind off to make our flat back panel. So this is going to be under the dog anyway and not seen as much. But again, what you would have done instead is you would have not bound these off first. You would have worked around until you got to the ending ones and started binding off from here to here. So I just started off in the wrong spot for binding off. So if you understand that, go ahead and know that for next time you want to go the way you're knitting and then bind off these. Don't start with these and then go for those. You're doing a little different than you did for the ones up here. But now we're going to work this as just a flat panel. So what we're going to do is we're just going to do a straight knit, and I'm going to do probably about another 10 rows of straight knit, and then we're going to do a little bit of garter. So we should get to row 35. So we're going to knit it over. And what we're just going to do is work as a flat panel. And that's all I'm doing. I'm wrapping them to work them as a flat panel. Removing the stitch marker that I don't need anymore. Just kind of work your way back. I always like to go and lock it in place and then kind of go back and knit them over. It usually seems to work best for me. And again, I'm sorry that I messed up that one part, but it shouldn't, like I said, affect too much, because now what you're working on is just the back of the blanket, or back of the dog sweater. And you could do that knit bind off without the crochet in between with the 4 over here. I just decided to do the chain in between. But again, you can easily fix that on when you're doing one. Okay, and that counts as a row. Push them down. And go ahead and work your way back and forth for about 10 rows. And again, so we're back here, and if you look, what that means is we've got the spot for his legs, we've got the spot covering his belly, and now we're binding this off so that his back legs will have some room, if that makes any sense. So go ahead and keep working your way back and forth for about another 10 rows, and then we'll figure out the next part from there. Okay, so we did 10 rows, so we're on row 35. Now, if you can see the design coming out a little more. We've got our holes, we've got the belly, and now we have the bind-up part. This is the part where the back legs would show through. Now, it would be up to you if you want to do any more flat panel rows, because this is the back of the dog sweater. What I'm actually going to do is a couple rows of garter before I take this off, to show you guys, what it looks like on my daughter's stuffed animal. I'm going to do a couple rows of garter stitch because it helps it lay a little flatter, so I figure that would be better on the back of a dog. So we're going to do just another row of knit, a row of the row, and another row of purl. And I'm just doing the E-wrap method, because like I said, it's usually faster for me. And I get more of a rhythm going on when I want to wrap, and I can hold on to my tension a little better than the other way. And I usually lock it in place there, and then I can go back here to the beginning and just knit over. So that's our row of knit. Okay, now just do a row of purl, starting with this one, back the other way. Now remember, when you're working your way back, you don't usually do anything to that first peg. So go ahead and work your way back to a purl, and then do, Do this a couple more times. So do another row. This is our purl row. Do another row of knit, another row of purl, and then another row of knit. So you're ending on a knit, and then that should help hopefully with the the laying of the dog sweater on the back of the dog. If I kept this design very simple, I hope it's easy for you to modify to your dog. And then once you get the idea of how long you need certain things, go ahead and have more fun with the design, trying out different stitches as well that you might like. Okay, now we're going to do another row of knit, and another row of purl, and then another row of knit. So come back after you do that, and we'll be able to take this off the loom. Now it's time to bind this off. We're going to do a crochet bind off, which means we're going to do similar to how we did with the other kind of binds off, but this time I'm actually going to rewrap this peg. And then move it over, knit it over, just making sure it stays on there, wrap it one more time, just doing one chain in between. That's what the rewrapping does. Move it over, knit it over, rewrap one more time, knit it over, move them over, I usually give this one just one more wrap because I gave the other side one more wrap. Now you want your scissors and crochet hook. Cut yourself the tail. Doesn't have to be too hugely long. And then take your last loop off the peg. Make sure you get both. Put your crochet hook in. And now the tail that you have here, we want to bind it in there. So we're going to kind of go, I'm going to go over to a stitch over here. If it cooperates. And I'm going to bring my tail all the way through. To help lock it in place. And then what I can do is I can weave in the end of it in the project a little bit. And again, this is just to lock it in. So it just gives it a couple little knots, and then you can kind of weave it into the project. Usually along the outer seam if you want. You're more or less just trying to hide the tails a little bit. So you get in there enough where you know it's not going to be an issue. Then you can just quickly snip it down a little bit. And there you go. There's your dog sweater. And with doing the garter, it kind of helps it lay a little better. And again, this is the part for the belly and the feet. And again, you should be able to modify if you need more of a neck. Just go ahead and do more rows at the beginning before doing that part. But this is what it looks like. And now I'm going to go and I'm going to put it on her dog so that you can see. Okay, here it is on the dog. It was a little tight fit. This is just a stuffed animal doll that she has, but this is just to give you an idea of how hopefully it will look on your dog. And again, like I said, this is the collar part. You may need to adjust how much, how many rows you do again with the dog. And then just kind of lays, and doing the garter stitch on the back helps it lay on the dog. It actually turned out pretty good size for her dog. There's the dog's tail to give you an idea. And it looks like it still gives plenty of room for the back leg. But again, you may have to adjust this for the dog that you own. So make sure that when you're doing this, keep that in mind. And again, this was it's still got a little give. But I'm not quite sure what size dog to say. Definitely a small dog. I'm not sure what size or types of dogs to say. If you do make this video for your dog, please comment below with what type of dog it was and how well, if it worked out well for that dog. Okay, I hope you enjoy. Have a great day.